Ms. Moss. Yield back.
Thank you. The time has expired. Now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Ms. Moss, thank you for being here today and sharing your family's personal story. Mr. Gobox, you said something a while ago that when you said a lower bail percentage, you mentioned that in your testimony. Tell me, I've heard of being soft on crime, but how is that impacting people getting back out, and why a lower bail percentage?
If the bail bondsman is accepting a much smaller percentage, say 10% or 5% of the bail amount, and the bail amount itself is very small, then these boosters may be able to get out on bail for only $1,000 or even less. And so that results in them being detained for a very short period of time, and that they can go right back to doing what they were doing.
So in a situation like that, they would be back in a Lowe's or a Home Depot rather quickly once that decision is made to turn them back on the street.
Right.
Is that because they're soft on crime, that the bail bondsman knows, in fact, that there's probably not going to be a prosecution and they're not going to jump?
No, I think it's, I would say that, this is occurring in jurisdictions in my state that are certainly not soft on crime, and the prosecutors are not soft on crime at all. It's just that the judges, there's been a trend over the years in many states where there's no political dynamic going on, but the bail amounts are being set lower. And, I think that's something that legislatively the legislators in Kansas may need to address. But it's one of many factors that is causing a lack of prosecution, or in this case, a lack of detention.
Gotcha. How is your office working to toughen federal and state laws to stop these gangs from stealing in different jurisdictions and then stealing just enough to stay below that felony threshold? What are you doing in that respect?
Yeah, so they typically, in Kansas, the felony threshold's at 1,000, so you'll typically see them stealing 900 or so in any given criminal event. And the prosecutors note this, and as I said before, they've got a stack of cases, and if there's no person felony, it's only non-person felonies. They tend to fall to the bottom of the stack, and I'm not blaming local prosecutors. There's a shortage of criminal prosecuting attorneys across the country. In my office, at the State Attorney General's office, we're having difficulty hiring to fill all the vacancies we have. But we do have capacity, and that's why in our state legislation that was recently adopted, we have primary prosecution authority if the case involves more than one county, which typically is the case in these organized retail crime networks. So we'll be bringing state resources to bear when that law takes effect on July 1st.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Millhiser, what's happening in communities where the prosecutors fail to apply the laws? What are you seeing? You mentioned that in your testimony about you've got certain prosecutors that have just decided not to apply the law in the book. Whether we change the law or not, if it's not applied, it's very ineffective for us to pass law after law, whether it be gun laws or drug laws or whatever the case, if in fact they're not prosecuted. What's going on in those communities, Mr. Millhiser?
What we've seen, and it's pretty uniform around the country, in jurisdictions where I call them so-called progressive prosecutors, because a progressive prosecutor is not in and of itself a bad thing. It could be a modern prosecutor that looks at diversion courts and specialty courts, all things I put in when I was the elected DA. Those are fine. But as prosecutors, when they come in with some other agenda, sort of these politically driven extremists that have done nothing but degrade the quality of the criminal justice system around the country in the communities that they serve. And I think what you see is crime goes up. Businesses leave. We see what's happening in San Francisco. Now, they recalled that DA last year. In St. Louis, that's another one, with the circuit attorney, Kim Gardner, who recently, before she resigned, a judge called her office a rudderless ship of chaos. Now, I've run prosecutor's office. You don't want to have a judge call your office that. But she not only had this political agenda, but she was inept and could not run an office. In Chicago, the same thing with Kim Fox, who was a progressive prosecutor, so-called progressive, again, because they just decide, hey, I'm going to raise the thresholds, I'm not going to prosecute these cases. And people come in, they don't file charges, they get right back out on the street. I think the Chicago Police Department called it catch and release. But you see this in cities around the country when crimes are not prosecuted and there's no accountability, those criminals know it. And they're right back out to deadly consequences. And it's seen all around the country.
And the word gets around pretty quick, I understand, in communities where we're not prosecuting crimes, whether it's organized or just community, the word travels pretty quickly in those communities, and crime just kind of runs rampant. Is that what we're seeing?
Very much so. So let's take Illinois, for example. So you have Cook County, where you have Kim Foxx, was the state's attorney, did a poor job of prosecuting cases. Will County, Jim Glasgow, Democrat, good prosecutor. DuPage County, Republican, Bob Berlin, good prosecutor. So those border Cook County. So those defendants know it. They know it. There was a carjacking last year. Thankfully, that carjacking person was arrested in Will County, where he was prosecuted and locked up. If that same case had happened in Cook County, the person would have been released the next day. So it's those jurisdictions that are incredibly dangerous.
Thank you, Mr. Milheiser. I'm out of time. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the ranking member, the distinguished lady from